Okay, so the first thing before we jump into the actual lesson on pop art today, which is what we're starting, I wanted to just quickly go into the OC, just likes to start. Sorry about that. Whenever I click on a slide, random videos just start, playing. So let's, not random entirely, actually. Let's take a look at the calendar really quick, which we just were mentioning for a minute. So today we're on Thursday, and we're going to be introducing pop art and specifically talking about Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein, who are two of the most influential American pop artists from that movement. But first, I just wanted to take a look at this and remind you that yesterday you should have watched the short video introduction to the January 21st classwork assignment. That classwork's due today. It's not very complicated, which is why I thought a video introduction would be just fine for that. You can find that video introduction right here on this slide. You can also find it on the Wednesday slide. Also, I emailed it to everybody. It has two options, and those are a critique of a Monet artwork and an Andy Warhol artwork, and also an option to do a 3-circle color scheme worksheet sort of thing that you could do on paper or on your iPad that has work with 3 different color schemes. Okay, so that's due today. But first, we're going to turn our attention to the pop art demo. And then tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about a contemporary pop artist named Romero Brito and introducing the artworks, okay? And then I anticipate that that will take most of the day tomorrow. So then the next thing that will be happening, okay. No, so what I have, I can't bring up the little slide advancer without clicking. Sorry about that. Okay, so then the next week, we're doing that overlapping of finishing up the artwork for this week, and then working also on tying up the second quarter work that people might owe. So we'll be doing a combination of, I anticipate the beginning of the week we'll be working on demos and stuff, work time for the last artwork, but then also moving into working on anything you might owe. And it's really important to me to emphasize that I know that some of those old artworks and assignments go back several weeks for some of you. So you may really find it helpful to come to class prepared to say, okay, here's this thing that we were supposed to do, in December, in the beginning of December. I don't remember what this means. I wasn't here for that week, or I just forgot. Could you please help? I am 100% willing to do that. Other people are probably going to benefit from it. Or I could say, this is where you find it. But that's, an important thing that we can do together that I want to be here to help with. Okay, so my goal is to help people get work in and pass the second quarter. So I would like to help you do that. It's really all on you whether you want to engage or not. Okay, so please, head into this weekend prepared to work and start working. I'm sending those emails out to people with some information probably today or tomorrow. And I really want you to be on board. Okay, so the choice is yours. All right, questions on that before we go into the lesson? Here's a little sneak peek at the choice board with the artworks on it. We're going to be kind of talking about some of that stuff today, but not really getting into the artworks, like I said, until tomorrow. Okay, so let's take a look at this slide. It's got lots of beautiful and bright things on it. I've always had an interest in pop art. I've liked Andy Warhol forever, since I was in high school, probably. The color, obviously, appeals to me. I think he's pretty fascinating. We are used to, this is one of those times when I have to remind you about what art has been for centuries. And I need to remind you that your frame of reference is that anything goes in art, cartoons, cartoon imagery, pictures of a soup can. That stuff you take for granted. But remember that art for centuries and centuries was based on just a couple of sort of criteria, that it aimed to look realistic, okay, like what it really looks like in real life. Usually it told a story, and that story was whatever the church wanted it to be, because they were the main commissioners and supporters of the arts. And it was telling church stories basically to people who couldn't read. And then the other part of that I mentioned was rich people commissioning artwork. So we have a lot of portraits of rich people. Okay, so there were only, not that there were only a few things that people made art for. I don't mean that, but there was sort of overwhelming trends in art for a lot of centuries, and none of them were making comics. Okay, so there were a few major breakthroughs in the late 1800s, around the time of Van Gogh and other artists like him and Monet, where they were like, maybe I'll paint something, not just how I see it, but kind of how I feel about it. And so they were bringing forward more colors, or they were taking the liberty to emphasize light rather than realism and stuff like that. So that was a pretty big change and a pretty big departure. And that led to some of the major breakthroughs in modern art, like a collective thinking of, hey, we could do this a different way. Like that seems like something that we take for granted now, but that was a pretty big change in the world of art, just like how we saw changes in music over time. Like, can you imagine someone trying to introduce hip hop into the world during the age of, Victorian age, and when people couldn't even show their ankles, like it just doesn't happen. So pop art was coming out after, it was in the 1960s. So just think of what you know about the 1960s, okay, culturally. It developed here in America and in Britain. And it was partly in response to the artists that you have heard of that just threw paint on the canvas. They were like, this is my art to me personally, and I can do whatever I want. And they were just like throwing paint on the canvas, right? And other people were like, dude, what is that? And what does it mean? And they were like, that's not for you to know. And they were just like throwing paint on the canvas, right? Okay, so a lot of people didn't really understand that. And it was like kind of personal to them. And it was just a whole lot of mess. Okay, so here is a short little video that has some good words and a lot of nice imagery about pop art. So we're going to start with that.
It was a time of optimism and post-war economic boom for many. Supermarket aisles were filled with consumer products. Advertising and glossy magazines told people what to buy and made them want to buy it. Movie stars filled the silver screen, giving rise to celebrity culture, and the youth fought for freedom. Out of this new popular culture, pop art was born. Its subjects were celebrities, comics, cans, condiments, and cuisine. Its style was flat, colourful, graphic, and commercial-like. Pop art was... Critics were sceptical. How could soup be art? But pop artists were referencing the world in which people actually lived. And as Andy Warhol put it, everything is art. In the UK, Richard Hamilton was amongst the first to reference pop culture using cutouts from American magazines. He was followed by Peter Blake and David Hockney. Together, they celebrated and questioned all things American. Over in the land of the free, however, pop art was a reaction to the introverted nature of abstract expressionism. By filling their canvases with flags, targets, and tires, Robert Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns paved the way. Then, Andy Warhol burst onto the scene with his screen prints, taking reign as the king of pop. Roy Lichtenstein turned comic books into high art, and Claes Oldenburg turned toilets into cushions. Down under, pop art started as a reaction to the conservative state of Australian art. A group called the Annandale Imitation Realists added odds and ends to their canvases in defiance. Later, the American and British pop culture explosion was embraced by Aussie artists like Martin Sharp and Brett Whiteley. By the end of the 60s, pop art's heyday was over, but its legacy had only just begun. A post-pop art emerged. In Australia, it was called popism. This new generation mined past and present pop culture and even borrowed, or appropriated, work from the past. Pop art is one of the defining and most recognisable movements of the 20th century. Today, it's more than a reflection of popular culture, it's a part of it.
All right, I like that because it's just a tiny little like snapshot with lots of good definitions and images, and the imagery just completely goes with the subject here. Look at my quote that I added to the slide today up in the corner with Andy Warhol's signature because it's attributed to him. It says, "Art is anything you can get away with." And then also in the slideshow, or that little video, it said, Andy Warhol said also, "Everything is art." And just in case you didn't get enough quotes by Andy Warhol just now, he is also the one that said that everybody is looking for their 15 minutes of fame. That's all Andy Warhol. He was really influential on the entire scene in the 60s and the 70s too. He didn't die until 1987, and he was making artwork pretty much up until the end of his life. So Andy Warhol, there's a lot we can say about him. This picture with the flowers right here is his. I want to click. You see how it does that? I tried to click on this website and it opened up the video. Okay, so here is Andy Warhol's museum website. So he was from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is an industrial town, not too far from here. It's just about 7 hours or so. I went to school near there, went to college near there, and I went to the Andy Warhol Museum when it opened. It was so exciting. And it was fantastic. It was a really interesting experience. I went there again, just like, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago or a little bit more. I can't remember, kind of all does that. And it was again, very exciting. So this website is not super easy for me to navigate. Like, I couldn't find a big thing where it was like, hey, here are all his artworks. So I just wanted to show you this. That's a picture of him. He was unusual. Okay, so like if you were to get online and look for stuff about him, you could find a lot of, he was just unusual. He was eccentric. He was, like if you look at interviews with him, he was really soft-spoken. He had a lot of crazy wild friends. Like he was part of like just a really, like a kind of a party crowd, but he was rather reserved. He was just very unusual and very creative. So if I did a Google search of his most famous works carefully, then you can find a lot of things that are kind of representative of Andy Warhol's style. So he used a process of silk screening. So silk screening is what's, on shirts. It takes that very fine mesh. You're pushing ink through it after you've done a process of removing some of the emulsion, and you push through the screen, the ink, and then you can make literally thousands or hundreds, depending on the quality, I guess, of your screen and your equipment, and create print after print after print. So the very nature of that process can be kind of mechanical and automatic. And that lended itself really nicely to his whole philosophy on art at this time, which was, why can't we take something like a soup can, which is in itself sort of a mass assembly line kind of commodity, and just create this artwork and print, 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 print. So he was really doing this very fascinating idea, taking this fascinating idea of the image, kind of separating it from the product, and then creating it and just printing it, printing it, and printing it. So he had critics, of course, who were like, well, that's not art. You took this photograph taken by someone else and you simplified it or whatever. You added your ink and then you printed 500 copies of it. How is that art? And remember, I don't know if you remember, but when I was talking about Takashi Murakami a couple weeks ago, I was telling you, and I showed you that picture of him working and how other people were involved. Well, that whole sort of process was really made famous by Andy Warhol, whose studio was called The Factory. And he had people who worked on his team with him who would do pretty much everything. I mean, I don't know to what extent every day, you know, kind of thing, but they did all the work. And he was kind of the creative director. It didn't start that way. His earliest works, he was a designer, just like one of the other artists we're going to look at today, Roy Lichtenstein. He started out, let me see if I can find one when I'm scrolling. He started out by drawing shoes and fashion things for design companies in and around Pittsburgh. This is a pretty famous one too. Like the repetition of that is a big part of his work. Then he also did photographs and work, like there's a whole displays of just the boxes that products came in. So he was questioning what makes art, what can be elevated to the status of art, why can't the things that we see all around us be art? I mean, he had a lot of really good questions. So I don't know if you guys recognize this man from your studies, but he was the communist leader of China at the time. When you go to the Andy Warhol Museum, this portrait is, it would fit in the lobby of our school, like between the two bridges. It's that big. That's how humongous it is. It's overwhelming. I don't even know how you make a print that big. I remember standing there just thinking that, like, how was this even done? I don't know. I don't know. I'd like to learn that, actually. I really would. So I'm trying to find one of his early illustrations, but I don't find it, and I'm not Googling it because I already made that mistake already today. Oh, here are some. So here are some of his early illustrations before he really got into the pop art. So he had, I just wanted to show you that he had a background with other kinds of things before he got into the most famous artwork. And there's one of the famous quotes attributed to him. Okay, so Andy Warhol released a distinctive style and a very influential artist of the 19th, 20th century, and still continuing to influence today. We're going to talk about that tomorrow more. Okay, so if we go back here, the next thing that I want to show you is work by an artist called Roy Lichtenstein. And this is an artwork by him right here, this girl, and this artwork here that says pop, which is really sort of symbolic and representative of his artwork, which is most well known in this comic book style that he was most famous for. But it is not the only thing that he is known for. It's not his only style. He also had a very prolific career. He died in 1997, so he was painting a long time. One of the things that I noticed was very interesting when I was researching is that, like, if you look at this one, he painted, oh, look at, that was right up before he died. Fascinating. He painted and was really well known for his, the cartoon inspired pop art, but he was really, really influenced by Cubism, and most of his work kind of combines the both of them. If you click on this tab right here called Image Database, then you can click on this link to the Image Duplicator, which sounds really fancy and mysterious. And I just know from knowledge here that if you click on the 1960s section, that's where you can find the pop art that he's most well known for. So there's some sculptures here, which is kind of cool. And then some of these are the famous ones that he's well known for. So he would take, oh, that's a study. That's interesting. Okay, let me go to a different section. He would take actual comic strips from other people, and then he would simplify some of the imagery. He might rearrange the composition. He would add or change some of those exclamatory words and the color schemes. You know, he's primarily using a primary color scheme, red, yellow, blue, and then black and white, which is consistent across all his works. Sometimes his artworks have like a sort of a relationship about a commentary about relationship in there. Usually the women are like kind of exaggerated with their like helplessness or their, you know, kind of like interactions with men, but not in a way. I mean, they just, there's a lot. You have to look at them. And then there's also this kind of war feeling going on. Remember, it was the 60s. I wanted to show you this one because it shows what almost all of them have really largely, which are called Ben-Day dots, which are these circles. And it should remind you of what I was showing you in the op art lesson last week, which is that optical mixing stuff. Now, these aren't really mixing so much because they're only one color, but do you remember when we were looking at those, you could put things next to each other that were two different colors and they would mix to make that third color, like blue and yellow make green. So that's that comes from the Ben-Day dots come from comics. So that was a thing that he was using all the time in his artwork. So if you look at, oh, see, there's some cubist and surrealist looking ones. That's so cool. I want to try to find that one that he made, that self-portrait that he made. Oh, look at that. That looks just like the Last Supper. Huh, isn't that interesting? I haven't looked at that before. I think it was 1997. That self-portrait. See, he was really influenced by Cubism, like a lot. But he always, it seems like he was really, really interested to the end with the Ben-Day dots and stuff. So that's so cool. Okay, so I wanted to show you some of the highlights from his collection here in the 60s when the pop art was at its height. So he and Andy Warhol both were very influential because no one thought of taking comic strips and elevating those to an art form. And I think this might be the one I already showed you, but it's one of his most famous. Okay, and then lastly over here, take a look at this one right here, which is an animated version for a show, an exhibit that was in Chicago, and the rock band U2 made music, and it's animated. And look at the way they use circles inspired by the Ben-Day dots. So here. That would be an awesome project, making a animated short of artwork like that. I would love that. Okay, so any questions when we're looking at artwork by Andy Warhol? Or I guess I could do a similar, hold on a minute, search for Lichtenstein and see what we see. It might give us some more. Some of these you have seen and you probably didn't know it, like the one I just saw that's really famous. I have it in my slideshow for later in the week. It's got the woman with her hands. Oh, this is the most famous, I'm sure. This is in my other one, my other slideshow for the week. Oh boy, this one right here. This is his most famous. It shows the it doesn't have the derivative artwork right here, but the original comic has a lot more stuff like in the background. And so he did things like he kind of changed the line of sight where this was coming from. He simplified some of the stuff with this plane. He improved it a lot to make it a stronger artwork for what he was kind of going for. And this is one of the most famous ones, 1963. I hadn't hit on the right year yet. But that is a fantastic artwork. The colors, look at, so it's a primary color scheme. You can see that he's using both the dots and the stripes as just like a textured background to provide value. Awesome. Here's some more. You may have seen this one before. That's also a pretty famous one. And why? You might be like, why? Why is that a thing? Well, remember some of the whole kind of the deal behind pop art is to take things that are commonplace, take things that are ordinary, and elevate them to the fine art sort of importance, okay? To question what is good enough, important enough. All of that is part of it. You can see the influence of Cubism in a lot of his work. Okay, so then some of these are like takeoffs on artwork by him, but some of them, that's fascinating. I haven't seen a lot of these ones that are like later artworks of his. Huh. Those are great. Okay, so does anybody have any questions right now on the stuff that I introduced today? Look, they did some of the same subjects. There's Roy Lichtenstein's version of Marilyn Monroe. So they were really contemporaries in that way, just looking at the same things and thinking about the same subjects, just portraying them in very different ways. Okay, so if we go back to today's slide, here we're just kind of introducing these two artists and pop art. I tried to, but let me just kind of rephrase. With Lichtenstein, he was really primarily focusing on a primary color scheme, red, blue, and yellow, with black and white and tints and shades of those. Andy Warhol is a little more complicated. So like if I go to my famous Warhol tab here, he's using bright colors. And when we look at him, his artworks individually, you can't quite say, oh, he uses primarily primary color scheme. You can't say that. There are cases where he does do that, but then there are cases where you can't, like this, things are like really mixed up. So what you could say about Warhol is that sometimes he uses primary color schemes, sometimes he uses complementary color schemes, sometimes he uses secondary color schemes. So he seems to make some deliberate choices about color, but it varies and he mixes it up a lot. Like sometimes, I like this one right here to illustrate this. Sometimes it's analogous, sometimes it's complementary, and he seems to really play with those things intentionally, but it's varied. And they're almost always sort of bright. We don't see a lot of kind of dull, toned down imagery. It's really played up to be kind of bright and garish. It's not subdued and peaceful or tranquil. It's really played up to be bright. Okay, so there's the color wheel and how we're talking about that there. All right, so I'm going to go back to the first slide and take a look at our calendar again. So if you did not look at the classwork video yesterday, you should definitely do that and work on the classwork that is due today. Tomorrow, we're going to pick up with contemporary pop art. Here is the choice board for this week. The link to the 2 shows for the